This is Travis Wayne Goodsell, and as promised, I am going to do some video volumes. I don't know how many it'll take to get through this, but we're going to reveal the last days Messiah of the Jews, of the Christians, of the Mormons, of the Egyptians. And so in order to do that, I can't just come out and say, oh, it's so-and-so, because you don't have any clue as to who this person is supposed to be. And if you don't know who he's supposed to be, you're never going to believe if you are told who he is. So you have to have all the background information about all of the talk about who he is and how he transformed over time to so that you can identify him. Alright, so I did notes for this one, so this isn't going to be just an off-the-cuff video like most of my videos are. So there is some structure and order to it. The purpose for a last days Messiah would not be necessary. That's right. Wouldn't be necessary if there wasn't a collapse of both the government and the religion. I've been telling you guys in other videos, blogs, on my website and books that anciently it was a theocratic government, a combination of both government and religion. That has been severed for most countries in the world, and specifically here in the United States. And so there's a condition in the last days where both the government organization and the religious organization that is prophesied about and referred to anciently cannot be seen as a theocratic government, but as two separate entities. And that's what people don't seem to realize. You have people who talk about, the conspiracy theory that the Pope met with the devil and they're conspiring against the world with lizard alien creatures and all that nonsense. Yeah, I'm watching DC Legends of Tomorrow, so I've got to pay attention to that. And apparently the one Sprint commercial is a little louder than the rest of the audio. I hate that. You're watching a show and it's so low that you can't hear the people talk, so you crank up the volume, and then a fight scene occurs, and then you got to quickly crank down the volume because it's way too loud, and then a commercial comes on and it's way too loud and you got to crank it down again. It's all marketing scams. Anyway, that's the ransom economy video. That's a distraction. Sorry. Alright, so Nazi Germany. This was a period of time that revealed a very dark chapter in the world's history. And all we hear about is the final solution, when the Jewish captives in the concentration camps were gassed and murdered. But they never talk about what led up to this, because a people, a government, they don't just start off by, oh, let's gas people and kill them off. No, they have to lead into it. They have to get the support of their citizens. They have to get support of other world leaders and other people throughout the world. This is a slow process, just like a chess game. And it's a particular art of war tactic. And people are being left out of how it all began. And I've done other videos about alt-right conservatism's threat, but that, in a nutshell, is what it is. All of your fascism is alt-right conservatism. They hate women, they hate people who are non-white, they hate the poor, they hate gays, LGBTs. So yes, that's why you're seeing the current United States administration doing all sorts of laws, spouting all sorts of rhetoric and hatred against all of these different groups, against women, calling Stormy Daniels horseface, Senator Warren Pocahontas, and calling Dr. Ford a crazy woman. She can't remember, she's confused, and denying abortions for women who have been raped, and then allowing police shootings of blacks, criticizing black football players for protesting the shooting of unarmed blacks by police, and then the transgender thing that's going on now, and the tax cuts for the wealthy rather than helping the poor. So it's obvious. It's blatantly obvious. So for people who are alt-right conservative, you know this. If you're a woman, you know this. You are suppressed by your own party affiliation. And yet you still try to pursue change within that party. It ain't going to happen. You know, blacks who are paid to be alt-right conservatives. What are you doing? Are you that desperate for money? I can understand that, but come on. Trump pays to have a token black man behind him at his rallies. You know, he pays for everybody that stands behind him at a rally. And apparently his rallies aren't as big as the cameras are led to believe they are. And Fox News wanted to not show them anymore because nobody was watching his rallies. And then Trump complained and extorted Fox to continue to show his rallies. Though I don't think I saw Fox showing Trump's rally in Houston yesterday. So, yeah, beautiful Ted. That's more of an insult. You don't call men beautiful by another man, especially one who's homophobic. So, Ted, you just got shamed again. And you went and gave him a big hug on the stand. Ted. So this is alt-right conservatism. That's how Hitler did it in Nazi Germany. He started with, you know, his political rallies. He tried to rile the people up in his kind of thinking. You know, nationalism, us versus them. The enemy of Nazis was communist. That was Hitler's ultimate plan, was to take over all of Europe as a barrier between or a barrier up against the wall of Russia, and eventually intended to take down Russia. And so Russia, back in World War II, was our ally. And yet, after World War II, Russia became our enemy. And they have been ever since. The Americans, is it Showtime or HBO? They had that TV show where they illustrated the point that has now been released, that Russia sent all sorts of Russian citizens as cells, as they call them for Muslims. Russian citizens were sent here to infiltrate American culture and to be American citizens, so that they could then be activated at a future time when their government, Russia, wanted them to perform a certain function. And we're now witnessing, what that was, not just with Reagan in his days, but they were being trained and prepared this whole time for Trump. And Russia's been playing us this whole time, right under our noses. And so now we have trolls who are actual Russians pretending to be Americans, who are promoting the alt-right agenda in order to divide us as a nation. And you got to understand, Russia is no more communist. It's over with. Putin was not and is not a party candidate. He's an independent who was with the KGB, even though he had a desk position. But he's trained KGB. That's why he walks with a certain swagger. It's because that's how he was trained to shoot a gun, was through that process. And it's from their KGB manual. So it's all available for us to learn about it. Yeah, that's the great threat to the world and to the United States. And if it weren't for this, there would be no need for a last days Messiah. And so everybody way back in time all knew of the tendency in human behavior to become fascist, alt-right. They don't call it that. They call it evil. And so what I'm going to show you through these video lectures is what the Jews believe about the last days Messiah, what Christians believe about the last days Messiah. And there's a conflict in the New Testament because there's contradictory information, and I'll get to that. But most Christians believe Jesus Christ is coming for a second time, when in reality it's his Son, according to John the Revelator, who is to come to restore the kingdom. And that goes back to the Egyptian. The Egyptians had that concept and lived and breathed that storyline. What did I tell you? There's a fight scene and the TV goes loud. Man. Alright, so I hope it's not distracting. It's in the background speakers. So you should be able to hear me, but you probably hear some little muffling, mumbling thing going on. And so it's some demon horse that's on fire and trying to suck a person into another world. So, fun times. Yeah, what scholars, theologians, and Egyptologists, biblical scholars, they all try to say that all those stories, they're just myths. They never really happened. They don't mean anything other than a story for moral behavior. They rushed to a conclusion. They did not do a thorough research, and they didn't put all the pieces of the puzzle together from all the branch-offs of later religions that we now have today. And so let's get to it. And we'll start with the Jewish religion, and start from there. I'm going to pause or stop the video. I don't think there's a well here. This pause video recording. Oh, isn't this nice to finally know? I'm going to pause my video and then come back. Okay, I'm back. All right, the Jews. Their religious text is called the Torah. Christians call it the Old Testament, which includes what the Jews call the Tanakh, which is an acronym for the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. In the Hebrew letters that represent them, the Torah, T. So, all right. Under Jewish understanding, the Torah is the supreme law of God. That is the source text for the most accurate and correct truth. And when a Jew has a question about religion or anything theological, the Jew consults the Torah first and foremost. For a Jew to consult a lesser authority or other books is mocked and belittled in Jewish culture, because a person would simply quote a Torah passage to show that the person was incorrect in their thinking. And for Christians, you would recognize this being played out in the story of Jesus and Satan. When Jesus is fasting for 40 days, he confronts Satan. And if you've done your research, you'll notice that all of the quotes that Satan uses to try to tempt Jesus are from the Psalms. And Jesus, his quotes, that's right, they come from the Torah. And that's how the story is being told, that the Torah is the supreme law for the Jewish people, and that Jesus was a Jew and therefore understood and knew the Torah. So that's what they were trying to teach there. That's what I'm going to do here now, is first go to the Torah for the Jewish understanding of the last days Messiah, and then work my way down the Jewish chain of command of authority. So first we'll go over the Torah passages, then go to the rest of the Tanakh and the writings and the prophets, and Then we'll go to Maimonides. He is a highly respected Jewish rabbi scholar, and had a whole thing on the Jewish Messiah, which they pronounce in Hebrew Messiah. So I'm gonna stick with Messiah because my is not very good. And then I'll go to Jewish traditions after that, and discuss last days signs that are supposed to happen. And those are from the Tanakh, but they're not about the Messiah of the last days. So I'm not concerned with hierarchy in that case, because okay, so let me pull up my King James Version of the Scriptures, because they're sufficient enough for an understanding. If I have Jews who are watching my video, great. There are several instances where I'll point out corrections from a correct translation from the Hebrew, but for the most part it's not needed for the particular passages that I'm working with. And so the first thing is in Deuteronomy chapter 18, and starting in verse 15. Okay, this is the repetition of the law, or a repeat of the law of Moses. And so the Lord thy God, there's several different titles. It's not the actual name, at least in the translation. In the King James, they use titles rather than the actual name in the Hebrew. But that's not necessary for the point here. But God is talking with Moses, and he says, "The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet." And that's the same as the other prophets' titles. For prophet, there's a founding prophet title, which is a different spelling. It's the Magen, or Shield of David. It's the addition of the letter ayin in Hebrew before the word David, and becomes the meaning of founding prophet. Okay, I will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken, according to all that thou desirest of the Lord thy God in Horeb, in the day of the assembly, saying, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, neither let me see this great fire any more, that I die not. And the Lord said unto me, They have well spoken that which they have spoken. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee, like unto Moses. And so this is one of the titles of the last days Messiah, is Moses, the latter day Moses, and will put my words in his mouth. So he will speak the word of God. and he will speak unto them all that I shall command him. So he's going to get revelation from God. This is a foreign concept for Jews, because the Torah is the revelation from God. And so for a person to come to earth and speak the word of God, but also speak what is being commanded to him, is a new concept. However, you'll remember when the Jews were returned from captivity in Babylon with the takeover of the Persian Empire, King Cyrus said that the Jews could return to Israel and build their temple. And the Jews believed that King Cyrus of the Persians was speaking the word of God, the words that God put into his mouth, and did as God commanded, which is kind of interesting because King Cyrus, as a Persian, was not a Jewish follower. He was not a Jew. So, yeah, a little bit of a contradiction there, people. And it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. Which means you're going to have to answer to God if you don't follow the commands of this last day's Messiah. And then he goes on to talk about how to identify those who are false messiahs, false prophets. And as you can see here, a Messiah is identified as a prophet. And that's one of the terms. That's the religion side of it. And we're going to find out from other sources more about that. But first we need to talk about some stories from the Torah that are symbolic of the last days Messiah. Now, it may not be recognized at first how these stories are symbolic of the last days Messiah, but by the time of this video series it should be clear and evident. And okay, so the first one we'll go over is Cain and Abel. In the Torah, the main theme is about birthright and blessing. And so, yeah, Jacob and Esau will be discussed here shortly. And the right of leadership over the tribe, the family organization, is of vital importance to figure out, who leads the people. How do we establish a government system? And the system was a theocratic one, both government and religion. And yeah, we'll get to that when we talk about Melchizedek. So Cain and Abel are identified as two of Adam and Eve's children, men, and lots of people joke that, oh, they don't list all of Adam and Eve's children, therefore Cain and Abel were the only children Adam and Eve had, and etc. No, that's not the point of the Torah. It's not to give a full genealogy of every human that ever existed on earth. This is specifically talking about those who are a part of the birthright blessing. That's why you have the stories that pertain to those of the birthright and blessing, with a couple of tangents that have direct impact on the main story later on with the birthright blessing child, or the conflict over the birthright blessing child. And so that's the first thing that people need to understand, is that this is not a history. It's more of a trying to teach Torah. And so it's instruction. And Cain and Abel. Cain is apparently the birthright blessing son, because he's said that first came Cain, and then came Abel. So Cain is the birthright blessing son, according to the text. If there were previous males born to Adam and Eve, they would have been the birthright blessing, but it's clear from the text that Cain was the birthright blessing son. And Cain was given control over the agriculture, the farming. So he took care of the fruits and vegetables for the family. And Abel, he was put in charge of the small flock, your goats and sheep, the small animals. And as part of God's commandment, they had to give offerings of the firstlings of the flock and the first fruits of the field. That's God's commandment. And there's some missing information, obviously, of how that originated and why they had to do it that way. But for the sake of the Torah message, that's what had to be done, and it needed to be done in a particular way. And Cain went contrary to the manner in which it was supposed to be offered. We're not clear exactly how he did it wrong. The best guess is he may have not given of the first fruits. That's the more likely scenario. There are other people who have come around and tried to claim, oh, it's because he didn't offer a lamb offering, which Jesus is the symbolism of a lamb, being the Lamb of God, and therefore he was rejected. No, that has nothing to do with it. Cain's assignment was over agriculture, the fruits and vegetables. Abel was over the lambs. So Abel was required to offer the firstborn lambs as his offering, and Cain the first fruits. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as Cain followed it. And so he failed to be obedient to the sacrifices that were required of him. And apparently he was able to be in the presence of God because God talked to him and said, hey, you didn't do it right. And then Cain gets upset and discouraged, or whichever translation you utilize, countenance falling. He then plots to kill his brother Abel as he is in conversation with an adversary. And I think that is Mormon, but let me triple check here, because Mormons have additional information that they've added. Let's see, 4? Yep, here it is. Okay. Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord, and Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock. See, they specify Cain brought of the fruit, but Abel brought the firstlings of his flock. So it's clear that the Jew who wrote this post-captivity, this is not the original text. This was not written by Adam or somebody who knew firsthand of what happened. This was many millennia after. So you can see here what he's trying to propose is that Cain just gave fruit as an offering, and Abel did it right and gave the firstlings of the flock. Let's see, Cain was wroth and his countenance fell. And the Lord said to Cain, see, so he's in the presence of God, why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance falling? If thou doest well, thou shalt be accepted, and if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. Well, who's they talking about with these pronouns? They left out some information, didn't they? Yes, they did. And that's where the Mormons pick up, is they're doing a midrash style, which is a Jewish technique for commenting on the confusion in the Torah, and it's a lesser level of acceptance in Jewish culture. So first you go to the Torah, then you go to these other documents, commentaries. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, it doesn't mention Lucifer, so that's pure Mormon. All right, so they hint at it, and they cover it up with pronouns, not disclosing who the proper noun is supposed to be. And so, yeah, going way down on the list, you then go to Mormons who give a commentary on it with their canon scripture. All right, so Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field. So the field, it would seem that that's where Cain was working, because well, the sheep need a field to graze in, and it may even be possible that Abel brought his lambs over into Cain's field, and they were chomping on his fruits and vegetables, and so Cain got upset. I've already been chastised for doing a wrong offering, and now you're chomping my first fruits. So this is all a possible scenario, probable scenario of what may have happened that may have caused it, but that's not the point of the story that the Torah is trying to teach. The point is that the birthright son has been failing with his offerings, and he found justification to slay his brother Abel. And then God says, hey, where's Abel? He says, am I my brother's keeper? Posing it as a question rather than saying, I'm not my brother's keeper. And so he's trying to do a specific psychological gameplay. And the Lord is saying, your brother's blood crieth for me from the ground. And then the Lord curses Cain. And let's see, when you till the ground, you won't get anything. And you'll be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth. So he will be an unsuccessful farmer from here on out. And then Cain says, "Oh, this punishment is greater than I can bear. You have driven me out from the face of the earth and from thy face." And again, you've got to understand, back when this story was occurring, the concept of deities being personifications of actual humans of an exalted level was understood. This whole concept that God is a supernatural being and we can't see him in the flesh, and it's all just figurative speech in the text, no, I cry BS. So as much as the Jews and Christians want to believe that their later created God is to be imposed on the older text of the older stories, can't do that. Wrong, sorry. So this was actual God physically before Cain. And it's interesting because it's similar to Adam. The Lord was able to be in the presence of Adam when they were in the garden, and then they partake of the fruit and become mortal, and God all of a sudden sees them as naked. He created them naked. Now he sees them naked, and everybody's ashamed and cover them up. Yeah, one of those other questions in the Bible, which is easily answered if I were to be talking about that today. But I'm not. I'm talking about how this story has to do with the last days Messiah. And so here's the verse 15 is where Christians think that Cain was black, and therefore they could subjugate blacks into slavery, where it says, "And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him." Well, that hasn't stopped white people nowadays. With all the hangings and lynchings, and man, people are just evil. Okay, and so Cain gets cast out of the presence of the Lord, just like Adam got cast out of the presence of the Lord. And again, he too is going east of Eden. So it's the same story being retold with different names of people involved. And I've got to stop to take care of my laundry, so I'm going to pause. Okay, so the pattern that we see here is the birthright son violates his birthright blessing status, and the younger brother is threatening that birthright blessing status. So the birthright blessing son murders the threat to his authority, but in the process he is exposed and is removed from the society. But interestingly, because the birthright blessing son who would have replaced him is murdered, and yes, it is a symbolism of Jesus Christ for those of you Christians who are recognizing that a brother murders his brother, and Jesus murdered by his brother, even though it was the high priest who riled up the Jews to demand that Jesus be murdered, and the Romans implemented it, but that's who possesses people, is the evil mind. Okay, and Cain knew his wife. Well, who's his wife? They don't list it. It was a daughter from another mother. That's simple enough. Yeah. I'll get to that Lilith for those of you who already figured it out. Okay, so where's Adam? Here we go. In verse 25, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son. So here we go. Even though they have Cain's lineage, that plays a part into what later becomes the Noah story. And here we have Adam and Eve having another child, and it's a son, and here we have the reason why. Eve is the one who gives the son the name, which is contrary to Jewish tradition. It's supposed to be the man who names things, as Adam named things. Eve said, God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. So this new son is the one to replace the birthright blessing child. And so this son is now the birthright blessing son. And they call him Seth. And when I get to the Egyptian part, you're going to go, ooh, that's interesting. But yeah, this is how it goes here in the Torah. Cain, the birthright blessing son, slays Abel, who's a threat to his position of power and authority. And Cain gets cast out of the society, creates his own society, and in order to replace the birthright blessing son of Adam and Eve, they name their son Seth. Okay, so what does this have to do with Noah? Well, it's Seth's descendants of whom Noah comes from. And the generations of Adam are. And so they list the generations of Seth. And it goes Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, who walked with God, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah, who begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So the Mormons don't do Japheth right. In their temples, they have new names, and under certain prophets, the name Japheth has been utilized for the new name of the day of the particular day of the month, and they always mispronounce it. They do Japheth or Japhet. No, they don't do Japhet. It's mostly Japheth. So they make it a hard P instead of an F. But yeah, when you trust a many millennial later language over the original language, you get many errors of what it was originally. And the original Hebrew, it's obsolete. We don't know what it was. Even the Jews who wrote the Bible, the Masoretes, in 800 to 1000 AD, because there is no Torah text earlier than the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirm that the Masoretic text was the accurate one, but there is no original post-captivity Jew Torah, even in the Septuagint version of the Greek translation. And so, yeah, the Bible we have is even older than the original one that was written, which was at least 1,000 years after Moses. And so the Torah that we have today, you will notice in different parts of the book there are different grammars being utilized, and that was because of the different Masorete groups that were working on the translation. And, they put their own grammatical styles in there. Sort of like using the yod as the masculine singular plural, or the masculine singular ending, versus the mem as the masculine singular ending. Or no, mem is plural. I was right. But yeah, and the yod also gets used as a personal pronoun, which I'll get to when I talk about Daniel. Okay, so that's the story. Cain, birthright son, upset, kills the threat to his power, and gets booted out of the land, and a new son emerges to take over the birthright blessing, called Seth, and through him comes Noah. Now the story of Noah is that Noah listened to God, just like Deuteronomy says. There will be a prophet who will speak the word of God, and you need to listen to him, or you will be destroyed. That's exactly the story of Noah. He is the symbol of the last days Messiah. And that's why, Christians, Jesus uses his story in his prophecy of the last days. As in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the last days. There's a reason for that. It's because it's all symbolic of the last days Messiah. Noah is the symbol of the last days Messiah. So Abel is the symbol of Jesus being murdered, and Noah is the one to restore the birthright blessing status as the millennial reign of peace. Then you've got ritualistic symbolisms as well in this, but Noah shows up here in the Torah as a symbol of the last days Messiah. Okay, so then we have Noah, and he has his 3 children, Shem, Japheth, and Ham, Cam, for Kemet, for Egypt. That's the Egyptian word for Egypt, and Cam is the Egyptian word for Egypt in the masculine singular sense. The T at the end is the feminine singular in Egyptian. Thus Kemet, the land being female in Egyptian. And so here they have a man, and I've not recognized any Jewish scholar who has recognized this, because everybody believes that Mitzrayim, the supposed son of Ham, is the word for Egypt in Hebrew, and that wasn't the case. Ham is the Hebrew word for Egypt. So anyway, so yeah, there's some other connections to Egyptian that we're not going to get to, because we're just going to talk about the symbolisms involving birthright blessing sons and the symbol of the last days Messiah. So again, we have the same scenario of Noah and a controversy over birthright and blessing, and with Ham and the tent and then Canaan being cursed. That's significant. And then we have a genealogy listing, and then we get to know Abraham, who was called Abram at first. And so again, Abraham is a last days Messiah symbol, just like Noah was. So you see the cycle that's going on here. Father becomes the son, son becomes the father, just like sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset. Even in the first book of Genesis, you have the creation of the earth and the concept of evening then morning, rather than morning then evening. There's an interesting twist plot going on there, because you have day occurring first. So you'd think sunrise, sunset, but instead the Jews reverse it, even though the creation starts with light, starting the day. And it's an interesting twist plot. But yeah, we'll get to that with the Egyptian part. So Jacob and Esau, again, you see the same patterns with Abraham and then his son Isaac, and the sacrificing of Isaac, and then Isaac and Jacob, and so Jacob is called usurper. That's what he means in Hebrew. And just like Cain was a usurper by murder, because it was going to be given to Abel because Abel was doing well, Cain wasn't. And then he murdered and lost his birthright. So Seth is the type of usurper. But here we have Jacob and Esau. Esau came out of the womb first, and Jacob, the usurper, was right on his ankles, holding on to his leg, coming out. And so there's the brother contention again for birthright blessing. And here in this story we have the mother getting involved. The mother is wanting Jacob, her younger son, to be the birthright blessing child, and is instructing Jacob on what to do to become the birthright blessing son. So first she has Jacob go out to Esau in the field to give him porridge, because he's apparently so starving, having been away for so long from food, that he was willing to give up his birthright. Not the blessing, the birthright, for the food that Jacob gave him. And that's significant because that all ties in. And so Jacob obtained the leadership, government leadership over the family, by giving porridge, or whatever it was, to Esau in exchange. And then the mother, it would be Rachel and Leah. No, Rachel and Leah were Jacob's wives. Rebecca would be the mother. So Rebecca then instructed Jacob to put on an animal's skin, because animal skin is hairy, and Esau by definition means hairy, Dacia is the Paleo-Greek equivalent. They add the D in front of it, and determinative, as I've identified it. But Esau is still away from the home, and so Jacob goes into Isaac, who's apparently blind and infirm in his old age, and Rebecca apparently seems young and vibrant enough to plot all these things against her husband to make Jacob become the birthright and blessing son. And that's what this was all about, was to pretend to be Esau so that Isaac would then bless Jacob with the blessing for the inheritance. And that's the distinction. The birthright is for leadership, and you have to get that through the birthright son, but the blessing, you have to get that through the father who gives the blessing to pass it on. And Jacob is able to fool the father, and then Esau comes home, realizes what happens when he tries to get his blessing, and Isaac finds out, oh, I already gave you your blessing. No, you didn't. What happened? What's going on? No. And so Isaac is then, or Esau is then upset with his brother, and you know, you stole my birthright, and now you've taken my blessing. So he's upset, and so then there's the angel wrestling in the middle of the night with Jacob and Jacob's ladder. Yeah, well, that, and then the next day he meets with Esau's caravan. Yeah, not a coincidence. All tied in together. So there was animosity between Esau and Jacob because of what Jacob had done, which his mother set up for him. And so that's the next story about that. And so we're at an hour, so the next section will be the Tanakh and all of the Tanakh's information about the last days Messiah. Although the Torah, Moses, again, is also a symbol of the last days Messiah because of the Deuteronomy passage in which a last days Messiah who will be like you, Moses. So the last days Moses. So we'll go from here and upload this and go on to the Tanakh. Oh, yeah, there's also Joseph. I didn't even mention Joseph. We'll just go extra time here and talk about Joseph. Again, Joseph is the favorite of Jacob because Rachel was his favorite wife, but he couldn't have Rachel first as the first wife. The father, was it Laban, forced Jacob to marry Leah first. And so Leah is technically the first wife of whom the birthright blessing son comes through, who would be Reuben. Reuben's an interesting name because it's not translated correctly with the later development of Hebrew. And so it's spelled with the Egyptian spelling of Ra, I think. Let me check Blue Bible. Well, let's find a passage where Reuben appears. It could be Seir rather than Ra. Okay, and she called his name Reuben. Therefore, my husband will now love me. And, okay, Genesis 29:32. Okay, now we can go to Blue Letter Bible. And I'm thinking it's going to be sear rather than raw. Blue Letter Bible. And Blue Letter Bible is cool. You can get a free disc through them, but it's a weird process, and you can't have an internet connection. Otherwise, it identifies you have an internet connection and refuses to function properly. Okay, 29:32. Genesis 29:32. And we'll change to the Westminster Leningrad Codex. Okay. Raw, sear. Is this off verses here? Apparently it is. I'm not finding Reuben anywhere here. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's seer is son. So that has to do with Melchizedek, which I should have gotten to with Abraham. Yeah, Abraham rescues his brother Lot and conquers the king who took Lot away, and obtains his spoils, and Melchizedek then comes into the picture to take a tithe from the spoils. Now, this is not tithing as the Mormons think of it. This is tributary. Melchizedek is two Hebrew words joined together into one. It is king, Melech, and Zadok, which is the high priest. Jews only think of it as righteousness, or righteous, as a definition, but it is a high priest, and Zadok was one of the priests under Aaron, who was with the Exodus. But the Cohen is the traditional Aaronic priest, priest of Aaron, and so the concept of seer had disappeared with the Hebrews and the house of Israel when Moses did away with the practices of the Israelites. And I have to be careful because I don't want to mix Mormonism with what's recorded in the Torah. And so, yeah, Melchizedek is the great king and the great high priest. So he's both the religious and the government leader, which means he is not a tributary king in the Torah. They don't say it. They just say Melchizedek comes and takes a tithe from Abraham, and they break bread and bless it, I think. Or is that a Mormon thing? Addition. But anyway, Melchizedek is not a tributary king. The king of Sodom and the king that stole Lot and the other kings that helped Abraham, they were all tributary kings. So Melchizedek was the king of kings over all these tributary kings. And because they were in the land of Canaan, It means Melchizedek was the Pharaoh of Egypt at that time. So that's important to understand that situation. And so Abraham has meetings with pharaohs and tributary kings, and then he sacrifices Isaac after meeting with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh takes his wife Sarai, who became Sarah, and then she's all of a sudden pregnant after this experience, when Abraham and Sarai were not able to have kids. Significant. And so Isaac becomes a symbol of the last days Messiah, because he's the son of Pharaoh, not of Abraham. But Isaac is to restore the kingdom of the birthright blessing from Abraham, not Pharaoh, because Pharaoh is not the legitimate birthright blessing son. See how this is all working? Jews don't know this, but that's the theme of the Torah. Birthright blessing, symbolic of the last days Messiah. And then you have Jacob and Esau, where Jacob usurps the throne, and then Joseph becomes the usurping son as well, taking over from Reuben. And it's interesting because it should go down the line. I believe it goes Reuben, Simeon, Levi, then Judah. Let's check this. Let's see, we've got Genesis 29 where Reuben is born. Okay. Okay, and she conceived again, and Simeon. Okay, Simeon's next, yep, and then Levi. So Judah is fourth on the list, and yet David becomes the king of Israel through Judah, when Judah isn't even the birthright blessing son to have authority to reign as king. Isn't that interesting? How'd that happen? Because Levi, he apparently didn't lose his birthright and blessing status, because he was put in charge of his own religious organization, the Levites, under Moses. And so I think even Moses came from the Levites. So there you have an interesting thing. Moses, who's a symbol of the last days Messiah, comes through Levi, and Joseph, or David, comes through Judah. And so this is all weird and messed up. But here you have Seir's son not getting the birthright blessing, and it doesn't go to Simeon, because Simeon was the one who orchestrated the castration and then murder of those who raped their sister Dinah, because I think Diana was one of the judges. And so, yeah, he lost his birthright for that whole revenge thing, as is believed. And then Levi, there should have been nothing wrong with him, because Reuben lost it, I guess, because he was the one orchestrating the deception about Joseph being killed by an animal, and giving his coat of extended length, not many colors. It was extended length, because if you're going to work in the field, you have to have shorter sleeves, shorter in the legs, so that you can move. Whereas the birthright blessing son, he's the privileged one. He doesn't have to work by this time, and so his was longer and extended because he didn't have to work. So, sorry, Mormon boy, Donny Osmond, your whole Technicolor Dreamcoat play, all bogus. But yeah, it came from the Septuagint that made the change. But the Hebrew, it has nothing to do with many colors. And so, yeah, Joseph usurps the birthright and blessing because the father chooses him over the birthright blessing son. Just like Isaac got fooled into making Jacob, and then when he found out later, he said, no, that's the way I wanted it. Yeah, so again, this is significant, and I was hoping that Reuben would have Ra's name rather than Seir, but that's okay. Ruel, which is a name for Jethro in the one particular passage, that is Ra. Ra-El, the god Ra. So that's very interesting and significant, because Jethro is the one who gives Moses his authority to go and claim the throne of Egypt. But yeah, that's Moses. Again, the same story, that you have a symbol of the last days Messiah who goes to confront Pharaoh for the throne of Egypt, the battle for the birthright blessing status. So it had nothing to do with just taking people away from Pharaoh. It was all about who was to be the leader, who was to be the birthright blessing son. And the compromise was met, and so the house of Israel ended up in the land of Israel, in the northern kingdom of Egypt, a place of Canaan, who was cursed because of the tent incident of Noah. So they're all interconnected here. You got to understand the previous stories to understand the other stories later on. And have I covered everything? Am I missing anything? Because we're 15 minutes over. Yeah, Joseph, again, he was imprisoned, sold into Egypt, and was a seer. Remember that? He's able to have dreams which foretell the future, thus became a seer. So Reuben is the seer, his son, by definition, but yet Joseph is the one who's having all the seer visions and revelations. So that's also interesting and significant. The actual birthright blessing son is not a seer, as his name is supposed to indicate. It is Joseph who instead is the seer, the son who is the seer. And so, yeah, when he helps Pharaoh interpret his dreams that Pharaoh can't interpret, neither can any of Pharaoh's priests. None of them have the ability to interpret dreams and be a seer, as they're supposed to, since they're the birthright blessing son in power, and the religion in power. And it's Joseph who demonstrates his ability as the birthright blessing son, and is put in second in command of all of Egypt. And then other scholars are starting to recognize, hey, as second in command, his children have heired to throne status. And so when people try to identify who those children were, and I've already done that in other books and stuff with the Kingdom of David, The David story we'll talk about in the Tanakh, which I think I've covered all of the Torah. And so I hope you can see the pattern that the Torah is teaching, and it's a pattern throughout the span of time, and that's where the last days Messiah concept comes from, is from the Torah, from the stories in the Torah about usurping brothers and a later descendant of that usurper who takes back the birthright blessing status. Okay, so end of part 1.